Once my grandfather left the Boston Police Department to work on the Hollywood production of the Boston Strangler, he needed to find a way to support his wife and 4 kids. The story in the movie was not the real story as Phil knew it, and despite the fact that the outcome of the movie stuck with him, he had to move on. So he took to doing what he knew best and started a private investigation business.
I do have my 2 sons here.
How much you introduce them?
This is my son John and my son Richard, the baby of the family.
Oh.
And
But this is second generation?
this is the elite of the detective agency.
There you go. How long has your agency been in existence?
Since 1968, I started it. I started on an orange crate in a lawyer's office.
The interesting thing about our agency and working with my father is that he never really asked either Richard or I to come work for him.
I had no idea 30 years later I'd still be doing this. And, but here we are today. It just kind of happened. It's basically like my brother likes to say, it's who we are.
And although their profession did not run down into their nephew's life, everyone in the family knows Phil's detective legacy from stories. During family holidays, my Uncle John would always pull out the old newspaper clippings of Phil where every article somehow explains that Phil managed to shell off a few rounds from his 5-shot detective special, or even seen George Kennedy portray Phil in 20th Century Fox's The Boston Strangler on UPN 38.
Mr. Carr, I'm Detective DiNatale. I have some questions for you.
But what wasn't talked about that much, and what I've come to learn by embarking on this project, is how much never closing the case bothered my grandfather. After DeSalvo was stabbed to death in prison in 1973, Phil saw the fleeting glimpse of a conviction touch the horizon. It was over. Or was it? The case of the Boston Strangler remained officially unsolved for over 50 years. Even a year before his death, Phil was still talking about his investigation to the media in 1985.
We'll be talking to Mr. Phil DiNatale, the Phil DiNatale Detective Agency in Boston, about his involvement with the Boston Strangler. And I'm going to start asking the questions right now.
And after he died from a bad heart, it was stated in his obituary that he was most famous for a case that was never officially solved. A heartbreaking ending for that man to have to bring that to his grave. And one would think that the Strangler saga would end there, but it was over a decade after Phil's death that alternate theories started to spring into the public's consciousness.
Now, you've got, Biography Channel, the National Geographic Channel, all these core TV, I think 48 Minutes, CBS, and I remember CBS did a whole hour on this, and I contacted the producer. She flew up from New York to meet with Richard and I showed her the letters that we had. I showed her some of the stuff we had, the psychological profiles, the transcript of him, being hypnotized, and she was stunned. But her answer was, "You don't think they're going to give me an hour to show that DeSalvo was the Strangler, do you?" I mean, they wanted to prove he wasn't. So they want to know part of what I had, even though it was like, look, here's the story. I mean, how could you not want to look at this? After 20 some odd years of listening to all the different stories, I've decided that we need to put some closure to this. The real story, the untold story needs to come out. My dad's story needs to come out. My dad's reputation needs to be restored. People are writing that the investigators were incompetent, that they provided DeSalvo with information so that Albert would have it for his confessions. These are things that are just simply untrue. And the people who have looked at this have been writers, have been family members of the victims. But what distinguishes me from these people is that I'm an investigator. So I bring to this a perspective and a professionalism that nobody else does.
Since the turn of the millennium, the archive has grown to include my uncle's dissection of all Phil's files. From there, my uncle finally recruited me 6 years ago to help him produce something that could recreate Phil's investigation and essentially cement the work Phil did into the public sphere. Phil was always concerned about setting the record straight.
And he knew And I think he tried to get the story out. But again, 20 years ago, it wasn't anything of interest to anybody. But now it is. And I just think it's my mission with the rest of my family to get the real story out there.
I want to refrain from cliches like a labor of love or a passion project, because this was deeper than that. For my uncle and I and our family, we wanted to put you at the desk of Phil DiNatale, unveil his investigation, and let the viewers decide on the merit of his work. It is our belief that without a doubt, Phil DiNatale was not the type of man to cover something up or to make himself believe something despite the facts. Thus, it has been my uncle and I who put this case into a digestible form for the public to wade through and see the full extent of the investigation. We wanted to do more than a TV show could, more than a movie, and even more than our documentary could. And as a result, we created this web series and entirely self-produced and self-released it in hopes of finally doing what Phil never had the chance to do: set the record straight.
It's for the matter of record, and it's been burning me up ever since.